Welcome to another episode of Daily Musings from Sacred Ground. Years ago, I was an elementary school teacher. I taught grades 1st through 4th. And I remember my friend Charlie at that time teasing me and saying, Michael, I think you became a school teacher just so you could have an excuse of being able to read children's literature without being embarrassed about it. It's part of my work. I have to. I love children's books. I love children's literature. And as a school teacher, I enjoyed reading aloud to my students. That certainly is not disconnected from the storytelling work that I would later do, where I'd go in and share stories, sometimes those stories coming from children's books. And one of the primary influences on me in terms of my storytelling work has been Ruth Sawyer. She was a librarian, a storyteller herself, as well as a children's author. She wrote a book, I've mentioned it here before, in 1942 called The Way of the Storyteller, that is still probably the most influential book on me as a storyteller. But as I said, she wrote a number of other books, both adult fiction and children's literature. And I enjoyed reading with my kiddos when they were younger, reading aloud together, me reading to them or going, I read a page, you read a page, all of that. But now they're all getting older and, they don't want to sit around and read children's literature with their dad, at between the ages of 14 and 33. So, but I looked on the shelf and I found a Ruth Sawyer book that I had ordered online a few years back. One of the least known of hers. It's called Old Con and Patrick. And it's a sweet story. I'm about halfway through it. But as I'm reading it, I'm thinking of the interconnection that I have with Ruth Sawyer. I never met her. She died in 1970. She was nearly 90 years old. It was just before I turned 8 years old. And of course, I don't discover her till I'm in my 30s. But as I'm reading this book, and I'm thinking, maybe I'll read this to my grandkids when they get a little older or, something like that. As I'm reading this book, I'm thinking, Ruth Sawyer, in these words, is speaking to me today. She put whatever effort she put into it as a writer and developed these characters and developed this little, not a big book, just a little thin book here, but and it's cool when you read a classic and you can think, oh my gosh, millions of people have read this story or thought about these characters, and you could feel that connection with the author. But there's something equally beautiful or lovely in a different way when you read something that's kind of obscure. This book, I think, what did it come out in? 46, I think it was. Yeah, 1946. And I don't know if anybody has read this book this year. And so it's this little personal thing happening between myself and Ruth Sawyer as I get to soak in her words and her story, the narrative that she developed. And it points to what I like to call our fierce interdependence. The Vietnamese Zen Buddhist monk Thich Hanh calls it our interbeing natures, how we inter-are with each other. It's impossible to describe me without Ruth Sawyer, even though I never met her, even though she died when I was just 7 years old. And how sweet it is to just sit in bed for a few minutes here at age 58 over 50 years since Sawyer passed, and have her tell me a story. I'm Michael Malley, and you've been listening to Daily Musings from Sacred Ground.